LGBTQ plus history. That's a difficult one for historians. Not because the LGBTQ plus community are particularly difficult, but because of legal discrimination and society's attitudes at the time when they lived. So many of our LGBTQ plus ancestors had to live their lives and conduct their loves in the shadows. So as historians, we have very little documentary evidence to go on. What we have to do is peer into the cracks of history. We have to look at chroniclers at the time. We have to look for unusual closeness between same-sex friends or partners. We have to look, and if we can, find letters that were written at the time, either by those individuals or by people close to them. But the challenge is, because of fear, of reputation, so many of our LGBTQ plus ancestors, when they died, their letters were destroyed or redacted. However, if you look closely enough, you can start to piece together some sort of LGBTQ plus story. And even if you can't, it's important to ask the question, who amongst the great women and men of history may have had queer relationships?
For today's royal romance, we go back to ancient China, 27 years before the birth of Christ, to the reign of Emperor Ai. He was romantically involved with one of his ministers, Dong Xiang, and their relationship was known as the Passion of the Cut Sleeve. Legend has it that they fell asleep on a rush mat, exhausted from doing I know not what. And when the emperor awoke, rather than disturb his boyfriend, he cut the sleeve from his robe. And for many hundreds of years in China, a euphemism for male homosexuality was, ooh, he's a cut sleeve. Well, I tell you what, I'd wear that t-shirt with pride. You may have seen the Hollywood movie, The Favourite, but how much is true? How much did Hollywood really want to tell the LGBTQ plus story? Well, it would appear, in the case of Queen Anne, they really wanted to. Anne met Sarah Churchill when she was 5 years old, and they immediately became the best of friends. This relationship continued into adulthood, and it was not unusual for ladies at that time to have intense female friendships. What usually happened is, though, when they were married, those friendships sort of petered out. However, in the case of Anne and Sarah, their relationship on Sarah's marriage to John Churchill remained just as intense, and this raised eyebrows at court. It was called undue. It was called an immodest passion. But Anne stood by her girlfriend until she didn't. Anne was controlled by Sarah. Sarah, whose descendant would be Winston Churchill, wielded huge political power in the kingdom, and her huge temper got the better of her. Anne banished her from court, and she was replaced by her younger and more demure cousin, Abigail. The jury is still out about the sexuality of Richard I, or Richard the Lionheart, as he was known because of his bravery in battle. But what I want to know is, did Richard have a big pink heart? Now, it is true that he was close to King Philip of France, and at that time he was trying to forge a strategic alliance with him. Chroniclers noted at the time that they ate from the same plate, and that at night their beds did not separate them. Now, in forming a strategic alliance, eating from the same plate or sharing a bed would have been a hugely symbolic act. And if it happened once, I would just think, yeah, that's statescraft. But it didn't happen once. It happens time and time again. So, were they lovers? Was it just a big bromance? Or was it, in fact, statescraft as part of a strategic alliance? We'll never really know. But unless we consider the fact that Richard I might have been gay, we fall into the trap of believing that all historical figures were straight. And that, my dear, is where danger lies. Hello, everyone. Shall we have another LGBTQ plus history lesson? Oh, let's! Today I want to talk about Edward II. He was King of England from 1307 to 1327, and I think we can claim him as an LGBTQ plus ancestor. However, like many of us, he made bad choices in men, and they eventually cost him the crown. His first boyfriend, favourite, as some people call him, was the amazing Piers Gaveston. They met as children and they spent an inordinate amount of time together. In fact, a chronicler at the time said, when the king's son gazed upon him, he straightway felt so much love for him that he entered into a covenant of brotherhood with him and chose him firmly and resolved to bind himself to him before all mortals in a bond of unbreakable love. Well, it sounds like they were pretty close to me. However, the aristocrats and the barons didn't like the idea of having a second king. And so eventually, when he was defending the king in an uprising in the north, he was captured by the barons and he was killed. However, Edward did find a second boyfriend, the awful Hugh de Spencer, whose father and Hugh, they just controlled the king. They did awful things. They banished people across the country, they raised taxes, and generally made it an awful place for people to live. They really controlled the queen, and poor Queen Isabella wasn't even allowed to see her children. She went to pay homage to her brother, the King of France, and she took her heir with her. Edward leapt them out of his sight. When she was there, she raised an army of disgruntled English citizens who'd been banished by the nasty Le de Spencer. They invaded England. Edward and Le de Spencer were on the run. They went to his lands in Wales, but they were captured. Le de Spencer was hung, drawn and quartered whilst Isabella ate dinner. Edward II was holed up in Berkeley Castle and imprisoned, and although there was a nasty rumour that he was impaled upon a hot iron, that only really appeared 50 years after his death. More likely, he just died of starvation.
James I of England was originally James VI of Scotland. He was the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, and ascended to the English throne on the death of Queen Elizabeth I, thereby uniting the Scottish and the English crowns. His son, Charles I, would meet a very sticky end by the hands of the parliamentarians behind me. Now, James was married to Anne of Denmark and had several children by her, but it was recorded at the time that he had very intimate relationships with male courtiers. Perhaps the most famous of these was George Villiers, the Duke of Buckingham, of whom it was said he would kiss as a mistress. Now, Charles had no problem with his father's relationship, and they remained on very good terms even when Charles became Charles I. And you know what this shows to me? LGBTQ+ blended families have existed for hundreds of years, and I say amen to that.